to item 19, which is the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre funding. And I welcome Graham Bodman. Graham, are you still there, my friend? I saw you earlier, your photo, so Councillor John Watson will be moving this item, and the second will be Councillor Bartley. So I now open up for discussion and welcome Graham Bodman. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Chair Alf. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take the report as read, and I'll just provide a very quick overview, which is that there's provisional funding has been made through the emergency budget in financial year FY21 for $100,000, and the provisionally attached to the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre. And the purpose of this report is to recommend that the PACE Committee approve a one-off payment of this $100,000 to the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre. It's really that simple, and happy to take any questions that anybody may have. Kia ora.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm going to open up for questions and comments together as I have all the way through. And there are no changes at this stage to A and B that you have on your agenda that was sent out. So first question, Councillor Coombe.
Thank you. Just happy to support this item, but I just had two questions, if I may. The first one was if we had supported a 2.5% rates rise increase package, would this funding have been available? And the second question is, in terms of the IM Auckland item that we had on the agenda earlier, and I think it was in a table, the implementation table, there's no reference to the youth centre specifically. It is a general item, general goal, I guess, in terms of supporting youth centres, but I was curious why it's not identified as a specific goal to support this youth centre if it's needing funding. So just those two questions, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you for the questions. In terms of your first question, in terms of this, what would the situation have been had 2.5% rates increase been passed? I don't have the answer to that question. I could put it across to one of my financial colleagues possibly to provide a response to that, but otherwise I'd be sort of dabbling in the hypothetical.
Yeah, I'd just like to know if it was in the 2.5% package, but I can take that offline.
Sorry, Graham. Look, if we could take it offline in regards to that, because the fact that we settled on 3.5, so Pip, if we could take that offline, that'll be great, and we can end up talking with our finance team.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. And with respect to your second question, Councillor Coombe, IM Auckland. I haven't got reference to that immediately in front of me, but I do. You may recall I think it was the 11th of June, we had the report back from the Community and Social Policy team on Council's work on youth centres and services and the provision of, and we also heard a delegation from the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre and the public input part of that particular meeting. So it has been considered in that context, and the Youth Centre also did provide a submission through to the emergency budget requesting this amount of funding. The resolution or the outcome of the Youth Centre's investigation work was that youth are generally well provided with a range of services, recommended the status quo, but did acknowledge that there might need to be some flexibility with respect to grant application opportunities as needs arise. So nothing specifically was provided with respect to this particular youth centre.
Thank you.
Councillor Henderson and then Councillor Bartley.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, pretty delighted to support this one. I'm fairly familiar with the work of the Youth Centre, and I think they do a great job up there. And I have read the report, but I have to cop to a little confusion as to how we're sort of funding this group in a very, and seemingly a rather piecemeal way. We've got one-off grants here and there all throughout the history of Auckland Council. And I note in the report that we are going to look at this in an LTP way, so that might answer my question. But I'm just wondering if you can comment on that kind of funding history and how sustainable and reliable that all is.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think my comment would be that it's certainly been erratic and not consistent. So it certainly would not have been able to be relied upon because there's been no commitment beyond year on year. And some of the funding has been through one-off grants before my time, but other times from the local board, and then over the last 2 years through one-off grants through the governing body as part of the annual plan process. So it hasn't been consistent, and I guess that would be a fair comment, which is why we've noted that in terms of any future funding, it would need to be considered as part of the LTP, and that would be the next stage to consider it. So certainly I can imagine I know for a fact from the point of view of the youth centre, it's not been the best scenario for them in terms of having any certainty.
Thank you.
So, Shane, just to let you know, the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre will be coming through in the long-term plan discussions that will start soon in regards to funding. And I think not only them, the other youth centres around Auckland who are not getting any council funding from the region will also be doing that.
That's wonderful. Chair.
Thank Councillor Bartley and then Councillor Collins for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to offer my support to this, and I wanted to second it because I went out to the centre and had a look, and I just saw the great work that happens there with kids of all different backgrounds, not just servicing one particular area. It's a wider area that they look at, not only bringing kids together for sports, but just counselling services and just bringing young people together in their own space. It was really impressive. And I do acknowledge Caitlin Watson and her support and work with the centre. So that's why I wanted to second that. I'm glad to see it's on the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the councillors in the board.
Yep, thank you, Josephine. I've got Councillor Collins and then Councillor Walker, and then the last to finish off this particular item. If there's no further, I will get the mover, Councillor Watson, to do that. So, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Chair. You're texting me back, so you're doing a great job because you're chairing this meeting and you're texting me back when I'm telling you that I'm on the phone and I'm being dropped off. So I really do appreciate you all and all the multitasking you're doing. Sir, I just wanted to offer my full support for this recommendation and throw in a comment of perhaps two unrelated ideas that we've discussed today, which may relate to what Councillor Henderson was asking. Earlier in the meeting, we talked about the Community Access Fund, and I know that there's going to be a review of those groups which are getting council support, funding support, and I know it's a slightly different case, but I'm a little bit puzzled as to why this group, who are doing great things in the community, are getting piecemeal funding, and I think it would be worth a really good look. I know it's coming up as part of the LTP discussion to hopefully formalise some of this funding, but it does caused me some confusion as to how we kind of settle on funding arrangements for groups like this group who are doing really good things in the community. So I'm really glad to support it, and I want to commend Councillors Walker and Watson. I know that in the time that I've been around the governing body table, they have always been really supportive of this youth centre, and I think it's really important that the youth centre is supported, that they know that their local councillors are really supportive of them, and that heading into the LTP discussions, I'm sure that their advocacy will continue. So thanks also to Graham and his team, because I know that they've been trying really hard to ensure that the centre is supported, and I think this has worked out together really well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vessel. I'll then go to Councillor Walker and then Councillor Simpson.
Yes, hi Alf. I'm encouraged that the youth centre will receive this $100,000 funding. Both myself and Councillor Watson met with Mr. Bodman and also Claudia, and certainly there are a number of issues that have been raised that we need to address going forward, and I'll mention them now. We need a strategic approach to youth, and that needs to deal with implementation. And in that instance, I'm referring to the findings of the CCO review. We're having strategies, and in fact around youth, we really don't have anything strategic. So we need to have that. I'd suggest that we also need to have a regional fund for youth that could embrace youth centres. I've raised that on any number of occasions. And certainly as far as the youth centres are concerned, generally across Auckland, it would be helpful to have a template that indicates the different circumstances, the circumstances where council is providing land and building, CapEx funding and OPEX funding, which is the case with some youth centres, the case where the council is only providing the land and the youth centre, and in this case the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre, has to make a plea every year for a contribution to some operational funding. The circumstance where there are some youth centres that are on council land, council building, council funds, all the building costs and so on. And that kind of template and that kind of monitoring is essential for councillors to have oversight and to make equitable, fair and appropriate decisions across youth centres. And then in addition to that, it would be helpful to also in that template to identify the various deliverables of the youth centre. And I would make the observation that in the case of the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre, it has multiple deliverables that are probably quite outstanding across the region. So I make the plea, Mr. Chair, going forward, if the officers could provide that information and do that work, because that is what we need to inform the long-term plan decisions going forward. Otherwise, to again quote some of the comments I think that Miriam Dean made, we otherwise have a very wishy-washy situation, which is what we want to avoid.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne, and let's not forget the report that Liz and her team did on the 11th of June. Some of what you've said was answered in that particular agenda item and report, but also there was an option that we had there of supporting our youth centres across the region, but the committee decided not to do that, and we stayed with option one. That's because of the emergency budget that we were going through. So look, they've taken on board, and for me, I'm just going to move through to Councillor Simpson.
Oh, that's really what I was going to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I support this. I just want to make the point that this was part of the 3.5% emergency budget option. Councillor Walker asked me specifically in discussions whether this was in that budget, and Finance advised that it was. As you know, the lower option had a reduction in grant funding. So I absolutely support it, and I wish them all well. delivering for Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Thank you, Desley, because, thank you with the conversations we had in regards to this issue. Thank you. If there's no further questions or comments, I'm going to leave the last to Councillor Watson to close, and then I will put the recommendation. Just want to acknowledge the manager. I know she's on YouTube, but I just want to acknowledge the mahi and work that they do there and across all our youth centres. So, Councillor Watson, John, you've got the last say, and then I will put the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to all the councillors have spoken in support of this. I really appreciate it, and what's more, the young people that this region serves will be eternally grateful. And I wonder, Mr. Chair, if I could just make a few comments. I haven't said anything today, but as much as this is dealing with the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre, I think it actually fits in with some of the items that we've covered earlier. There's a kind of holistic picture starting to emerge here, and I think particularly of the I Am Auckland update, where we really, get a real snapshot of what's happening to our youth in Auckland, and remember, our youth make up a third of our population, 530,000 people, in fact. And with COVID-19, we are seeing some, real disturbing trends in terms of unemployment, where the youth is twice the rate of older cohorts, where there's higher rates of loneliness and isolation. Some really sad polling there showing things like nearly 20% of 15 to 29-year-olds feeling lonely all or most of the time. We have a third of the people, homeless people, in that kind of under 25 bracket, and it's being exacerbated amongst the most vulnerable groups, and that's backed up by all the various surveys that are done by organisations such as Youthline. And if we just look at that employment, the people not in education, employment or training, it was 10% at the end of last year, 16% before the first lockdown in March. Some areas it was 25% even at that stage. Goodness knows what it's like now, and this is before they come off the wage subsidy. So I think, Mr. Chair, when that combines with some of the other information we're privileged to get as councillors, and I think of the Auckland Plan update that we got at the start of the year, where we had the one paragraph that really stood out for me, and it goes to the fundamental role of not just this Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre, but all our youth centres, where in 2018, which was a couple of years ago, Aucklanders had a World Health Organisation wellbeing score of less than 13, which meant that was indicative of poor emotional well-being or poor mental health. And Auckland compared poorly with the other New Zealand cities. Suicide rates, as an indicator of mental health, in New Zealand reached its highest level ever, with the highest number of suicides in Auckland, and that was driven by an increase in the number of young people. Bearing in mind, New Zealand suicide rate is twice that of United States, 5 times that of UK, and Auckland was at the worst of the New Zealand rates, and perversely enough, areas like the Hibiscus Coast were at the worst level of the rates in Auckland. So it's not always the kind of socio-economic geographic mix that the people widely have perceptions on. It's great to see government funding being accessed for our other areas in Auckland that are in real need, like the South and West. And, thank goodness for the Southern Initiative and the work that they're doing in the South and the West. But there's massive big gaps, and the Northern region is one of those massive big gaps that this youth centre, it's rather anomalous, its name. It should really be the Northern Region Youth Centre. It takes in a lot more than the Hibiscus Coast. And it's dealing with literally thousands of people in any given year, and the officers provided us with some of that data there. In fact, in the last full year, they dealt with 39,000 participants, or people coming through their doors. That's 750 people a week, young people a week. In fact, it's more than that, because the manager tells me that that's just the recorded numbers. They can have anywhere from 100 to 200 people that aren't recorded, that pop in, that access some of the services or use some of the facilities. So it's actually a lot higher than that 750 a week that's actually coming through there. In the school holidays, we also get up there people from other parts of Auckland, and I think Councillor Bartley referred to that at one point, and with some of her comments, where people are coming from other parts of Auckland actually to utilise the facility up there, or go on some of their programs. Their programs are pretty wide and varied: music and arts, sport and recreation. But for me, the most important one, if I have to rank it, is what they do with what they call community leadership, but really what is to do with reducing mental health concerns, supporting suicide prevention, providing social and supervised activities for the youth, mentoring, employment guidance, and really providing leadership models from within the youth themselves to try and inspire and help their peers. The region it takes in is pretty big. It really is this northern region, and just bear in mind that the Hibiscus Coast as such is an area that's got about 20,000 people, half of additional people from the last few years at Millwater and Milldale coming, that are just a stone's throw away from this facility. So we've got a real compounding effect of them dealing not just with these very real problems in the Hibiscus Coast that are really disturbing, but also a massive population increase that's occurring right at that very time. So this funding from the council is really essential. I mean, we've got COVID-19 going on, we've got the existing situation, we've got the population growth, we've got the fact that it goes outside its immediate boundaries, and all those things kind of compound. I mean, just as a point of comparison, one person getting mentoring through the youth justice system, a cost of 150 grand a year is attributed to dealing with one of those people. So the investment here that the council's making in the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre, proportionate to that, is incredibly valuable. And I would just, Mr. Chair, really like to thank the officers, none of whom I've got to see, who have worked at this behind the scenes and supported the youth centre, because they do really appreciate it, they do need it, and this kind of hand-to-mouth existence is kind of incredibly unsettling, despite the very valuable work they do. But I'd just like to thank you, Mr. Chair, for the way you handled this item, and to my colleagues who have supported it, because for me, it's dealing with our young, our vulnerable youth in particular. That is a top priority now, more so than ever. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Alf.
Yeah, thank you both, and I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.